Ricoh. Ricoh. Where have I heard that name before? Oh right, printers and cameras. But what about automatic watches? An interesting and also cautionary tale surrounds this exact Ricoh World Timer. Let's find out, right here, right now, on the Time Worn channel. Ricoh on the dial of watches from the 60s to the 70s is indeed the same company which produces office equipment and optical instruments, among others, to this day. Ricoh's history started in 1927, when the Institute of Physical and Chemical Research in Tokyo decided to release commercial products based on their research. In 1936, an offspring company was founded by Kiyoshi Ichimura, the Riken Kankoshi Co. Limited, later on named the Riken Optical Industries Limited. A direct predecessor of Ricoh as it exists today, which focused on sensitized paper and optical instruments such as cameras. Since the early 1960s, the company was officially named Ricoh, and it was also the era of the 60s and 70s when Ricoh labeled watches emerged. But the origins of the watches division can be found in a completely different company, namely Takano Seimitsu. They produced wall and table clocks since 1899 and later on wristwatches. They were no stranger in the business and even had a cooperation with Hamilton in 1957 up until 1965 to produce Hamilton watches for the Japanese market. And in 1959 they brought out their first watch with a completely and independently developed movement. After some struggles on the competitive market in Japan, with Seiko and Citizen as tough competition, and expensive damages to their facilities due to a typhoon, the president of the aforementioned Riken Optical Co. Limited went on to become the head of the Takano Seimitsu Kogyo Co. in 1962. And thus, the perfect foundation was laid for the Ricoh Tokei Co. Limited, with Tokei simply being translated to watch. A few tidbits of almost forgotten history. The Ricoh Watch Company became number 4 of the great Japanese brands which produced their own movements, number 1 Seiko, then Citizen and Orient. Ricoh automatic movements could also be found in German watch brands like Rontic and Dugena, and in 1971 they were able to produce their own quartz movement right after Seiko and before Citizen. Their last mechanical movements were produced by the end of the 70s, and from then on the timeline is a bit hazy, or at least very quartz-centric, until the brand vanished completely in terms of watch production. After this brief historical detour, let's talk about the Ricoh World Timer in particular, and why it's a minefield if you wish to purchase this particular intriguing vintage design. First of all, it's an amazing design, which loosely resembles that of an Enicar Sherpa guide, with the important difference that the Enicar one had a true GMT hand in comparison to the Ricoh, but the Ricoh being a lot more colorful though. Now for the problematic part. While Enicars have a die-hard fan base and are well documented, special thanks to Martin van der Ven for that. There isn't a lot of information out there about the Ricoh World Timer, and this directly leads me to the main pitfall. There are a lot of sketchy specimen, or at least Franken watches of this model out there. Starting from 2010 onwards, a sudden spike in online offerings of untouched versions of this watch, mainly from the Asian continent, at relatively cheap prices, made enthusiasts quite suspicious. A weird watch model to fake, wouldn't you agree? But that happened a lot already in the past, mostly known with vintage Seikos or, for example, another watch that I was particularly interested in, the Edox Geoscope. Either it is just a lucrative market or the fakers had some genuine interest in reviving such a model. Most likely the former. To make things worse, it is very, very difficult to find information on how to correctly identify a true and original Ricoh World Timer. From what I gathered, a 100% true, no doubts about it Ricoh World Timer should have a signed dial at 6 o'clock with Japan plus a reference number on it. The World Timer signage above should be slightly more bold than the automatic beneath it. The 2 crowns should be signed with the Ricoh logo, a red lollipop seconds hand, and the R is set upon the dial while the Ricoh brand name is printed. I've seen original dials with blue, black and green colors so far. Now, if you look at the watch I'm holding right here, it bears none of these aforementioned attributes. Now what? Is it a straight up fake or aftermarket riddle one? Case closed? Maybe, but it is difficult to say for sure, as the online world is muddled with offerings of the exact version of the watch that I have right here, calling them all original, etc. And a true source is missing if there were maybe other versions of this watch produced for other markets, or simply later batches that looked like these. I know that there is a book about Ricoh watches out there, but it is in Japanese. If someone knows more considering the authenticity of this model, please drop me a comment below. With this particular one right here, I'm quite certain it cannot be as originally intended, since the inner 24-hour bezel is lacking in terms of printing quality, as visible with the off-center numerals and the weird transitions in color. And the lume seems too new, even sporting a blue and green hue, probably Superluminova BGW9 and C3, and those only existed since the end of the 90s. Since I'm a curious guy, I opened the watch to have a look at what should be the Ricoh 61 automatic movement ticking inside. Lo and behold, this one seems to be original. It has all the markings of a true Ricoh 61, even down to the newer version of the Monorex shock protection. The rotor with a slit and those 3 distinct dimples. So my layman's conclusion would be that the case and movement could be original, but the dial, hands, inner and probably the outer world timer bezel as well are aftermarket. Therefore, an amalgamation of parts, which we would call a Frank watch. I already talked in another video about how I can live with that if the fact that the watch is not original is officially disclosed beforehand, but with these ones, it usually isn't. Nonetheless, I like what the watch has to offer visually and technically. After being able to clear that up, at least as far as my research took me, let's take an objective look at this watch as it is, and as you can find it online very often. But again, be cautious. No guarantee that each and every one online is just coming with a repainted dial or aftermarket hands. I bet there are various layers of aftermarketry out there. Back to this one. The whole stainless steel case with a mirror polish is 43mm in diameter, including the rotatable world timer bezel. And at this point, I just want to address that the term world timer is a bit of a stretch for this watch, because this watch relies on you to set the bezel and 24-hour ring manually each time you wish to know the current time in all of those zones, since a proper GMT hand etc. is not included. It has a lug-to-lug distance of 52mm and the height comes in at 13.5mm with a slightly domed acrylic crystal on top at the thickest point. But the lugs are heavily angled towards your wrist, which negates a lot of that thickness on the wrist. The lug width measures 22mm and the 5-link bracelet tapers down to 19mm at the simple Ricoh branded folding clasp. In total, including the bracelet, we have a weight of 126 grams, which is fairly standard. The crowns are unfortunately unsigned on my watch. The upper one controls the inner rotatable Pepsi colored 24-hour bezel, and the bottom one is for setting and winding the watch, while the pusher in between advances the date. The dial here is glossy black, while another even more widespread version with a blue-purple color exists as well. Interestingly, this one has the R logo printed, while the Ricoh underneath is set upon the dial. The all original ones have it the other way round, and I would be genuinely interested about the thought process of the aftermarket dial producers there. The day and date window is nicely framed, and I've seen 2 different types of day-date wheeled fonts on these, as well as on the all original ones. About the price? That's a difficult topic to discuss, since I've laid out my suspicion about the originality of its parts. Nonetheless, you can find my exact version quite often at widely different price points. Also on Chrono24, but mostly on auction sites for quite a penny. Well above the €1,000 mark, which was a bit surprising to me. All of them labeled original, of course. But who am I to pass a final judgment on that? With all the info I just provided, I think everyone has at least enough information to draw their own conclusions about the value of this particular model. All in all, a cautionary tale about one of the more unusual watch brands and models of the 70s. The Ricoh World Timer has an interesting story to tell about the whole vintage watch world. It's a beautiful looking piece, definitely generating an appeal for the enthusiasts of funky 70s watches. But I get why people might shy away from these altogether when you're just looking to get a beautiful piece of history without a shred of doubt. Nonetheless, I am happy that a fellow collector lent me this one, as I would have not been sure what to expect from all the online auctions myself without some hands-on experience. As a final verdict, I love the look of this watch, I'd love to own it, and if you want that extra peace of mind, it's worth having that one eye out for one of those truly original ones. Hope you enjoyed this unique timepiece as much as I did, and see you in the next one on the Time Worn channel.